No matter where you live in Canada, war has had an impact on your hometown. Yorkton is no different. From the very first conflict Canada embroiled itself in, Yorkton citizens were not hesitant to stand up for their country. I'm Hayden DeGrow, and I'm the Culture and Heritage Specialist for the City of Yorkton. I love learning history, and teaching people about Yorkton's past is a proud part of my job. Join me as I highlight fascinating people, places, and events from Yorkton's history and take you where these places can be found today. This is Yorkton Retold. Not long after the York colony was established in the 1880s, frustration was simmering across the prairies. With Indigenous peoples fearing the complete loss of their cultures, large groups banded together to make their voices heard. Led by the recently repatriated Louis Riel, the Northwest Resistance threatened the newly established settlement of Yorkton. To counter this threat, several of the men and farmers around the colony raised arms in a minor militia known as the Yorkton Home Guard. Led by Major Watson, a military officer that arrived from Ottawa in response to the tension in the area, the Home Guard built a stockade on the eastern end of the village. Named after their leader, this stockade became known as Fort Watson. Inside the stockade was a magazine that stored the weapons, a barracks for soldiers, a dorm for families, and an area for soldiers to pitch tents. The entire compound took about 3 town sites and covered an area of 2,000 square feet. During the entire 5-month conflict, 62 men enlisted in the militia. Here, we get to see the names of those men, with highlights including the founders of the colony itself and newcomers afterwards. Though they were armed with over 100 rifles and stocked with 5,000 rounds of ammunition, no conflict arose in the area and not a single shot was fired in the Yorkton region. When Riel was defeated and arrested, the resistance was over. Fort Watson was dismantled and the Home Guard was disbanded. Watson returned to Ottawa and life returned to a relative calm in Yorkton. However, this peace was not to last. 15 years after the resistance, another major conflict arose that prompted volunteers from Yorkton. In 1899, South Africa, which was mainly under British protection but independently ruled through 2 republics, was suddenly being overrun by hundreds of gold-seeking prospectors. As the British Empire let this invasion go through without control, and the native Africans, called the Boers, began fighting back, it escalated into a full-scale war. Citizens from across the British Empire were sent notice to enlist in the fighting. In Yorkton, this photo shows 12 volunteers to represent the first wave from this area. This photo was taken in front of Yorkton's original RCMP detachment, dressed in their military formalities. The Boer War lasted a little more than 2.5 years, ending in 1902 with Britain fully annexing the 2 republics into a union, which became known simply as South Africa, the old republics becoming provinces in the country. 9 veterans returned to Yorkton, once again trying to return to a simple way of life and a feeling of normalcy in Yorkton. Sadly, normal life was not to last long for Yorkton. In 1914, World War I erupted in Europe, with Great Britain joining in the fight. As Canada was still a part of the British Commonwealth, men from across the country were enlisted and later conscripted to serve in the military. By this time, Yorkton had grown to a full-sized town of over 2,500 people, which meant that hundreds of men from Yorkton and the surrounding area came to serve their country. One of the most notable was Alexander Ross, a lawyer and judge from Yorkton. Ross, having already been a soldier prior to World War I, began the war as a captain and rose quickly through the ranks again, reaching the rank of colonel by the time of Vimy Ridge, where he commanded a battalion of soldiers to victory at the famous battle. By the time the war was over, Ross had reached the rank of brigadier general, the 4th highest rank in the Canadian Army. Yorkton, as well as many communities in Canada, would go on to name streets in honor of Ross's contribution to Canada's peace. This is Yorkton's version, Ross Drive. Located in the Mindmaster Park neighborhood, this street is purely residential. It was christened after Ross had died. In addition to his own street, Alexander Ross was also honored by the newly created Royal Canadian Legion by having the 77th branch bear his name. Here we see their current branch office, where information on veterans in Yorkton can be found. The Legion had been founded by veterans of the First World War as a means to ensure that they and their fallen brethren would not be forgotten. This was important to Yorkton especially, as by the end of the war, the town had lost 56 men to the war. One of the highest ranked on these men was Major Charles D. Livingston, another of Yorkton's prominent lawyers, as well as Yorkton's mayor right before the conflict. Also in the fields of the Battle of the Somme, Livingston was immediately missed in his hometown. To honor his political contributions, as well as his sacrifice to Yorkton, the city renamed North Front Street to Livingston Street in his honor, which it remains as such today. Livingston and Ross were not the only men honored. To those returning alive, the city put on a celebration parade from Town Hall to the Canadian Pacific Railway station. The most notable parts of this parade was the Peace Arch that was erected across 3rd Avenue between the two banks at the intersection with Broadway Street. To ensure that none of the fallen were forgotten, the city commissioned a tall memorial in the city. Known as the Yorkton Cenotaph, it is built on a median in the middle of Darlington Street and 2nd Avenue North. A grand ceremony was held to unveil the cenotaph, which was attended by everybody in Yorkton as well as dignitaries from across the province, including the Lieutenant Governor himself. World War I had turned out to be Canada's military proving ground, showing that it was a force to be reckoned with. As a result, throughout the 1920s and into the 1930s, many new divisions and regiments were introduced to Canada's Army. In 1938, the 64th Battery of the 17th Field Regiment was introduced, with Yorkton declared as its home base. With it, this armory building was commissioned to house it. The original plan was to have the building house a full-size drill hall, auditorium, officers' quarters, and a rifle range, similar to what is seen in Regina. However, in 1939, on the cusp of World War II, plans were changing, and the building was downgraded to a center for basic training. When war was officially declared against the Axis powers in 1939, even those plans were changed, and the armory was changed to a simple recruitment center. Here, all men and women that enlisted in the army came to sign up and be processed. They then were sent to Regina's armory to receive basic training before being sent off to their respective bases and eventually on to Europe and the Pacific Theater. The Second World War was a harsh time in Yorkton. Nearly 1,000 men and women served their country, all of them coming through this building right here. This left a heavy burden on the remaining residents, who had to keep the city going. However, there were some upsides. In 1943, a new class of frigates was being constructed at Esquimalt, BC, and national defense gave Yorkton the opportunity to name one of the ships. While Yorkton could not be used due to the USS Yorktown, which was a commanding aircraft carrier at the time, Yorkton City Council decided on the name Orkney, after the RM that the city remains in. On September 18, 1943, the ship was officially christened, the champagne bottle being smashed by two Yorkton mothers whose sons were serving in the Royal Canadian Navy. Harold William Vaughan, one of Yorkton's councillors, was also in attendance. Vaughan also met the first captain of Orkney and his lieutenant at the launching, where the crew of the ship received gifts from friends and supporters in Yorkton. After serving in the war faithfully, albeit with a pair of collisions with other ships, the Orkney was retrofitted into a commercial ship upon the end of the war. In 1964, she was finally deemed too old and expensive to update, and she was broken up in Singapore. Another upside was the air base north of town, which I will discuss in another video. Sadly, like with all wars, there was sacrifice. 91 men from Yorkton in the region lost their lives, which left many families in the area devastated. However, just like their forebears in World War I, all of the lost were honored with a rededication of the cenotaph you see right here. This rededication was attended by hundreds of citizens and was among the largest gatherings in Yorkton's history up until that point. The biggest changes to the memorial were the addition of dates along the west and east sides of the memorial, showing the years that the wars had occurred. In addition to this memorial, the local branch of the Royal Canadian Legion installed their own memorial a few years later after the war. This memorial, shaped like a giant cross, was placed in the Yorkton Cemetery, honoring those who had fallen that are interred at the cemetery. Today, the memorial remains well kept and decorated by members of the Legion and is a highlight of the City of Yorkton's cemetery walking tour. When veterans returned to Yorkton from the Second World War, many had just barely entered into adulthood when they enlisted. They also married hastily before and after the conflict, sometimes even during. This left them with a desire for their own home so they could start families and live independently. To do this, the Government of Canada gave out contracts to builders to assemble houses for returning veterans, all of them falling in the same neighborhoods and each house following similar designs. This was the first time in Canadian history that houses followed what would be considered today a cookie cutter style. The street I am on now, Peaker Avenue, was one such area, with every house along this street being what it became known as war houses. Nearly every community in Canada has houses like these and represent how the nation supported its returning veterans. Now, Yorkton did have contributions in later years, including the Korean War, during which one man from the area, Gregory Anaka, perished. This prompted the addition of the Korean War's dates on the Yorkton cenotaph. As well, Yorkton was involved in the Cold War by being the host to a radar base. This again will be discussed in a later video. Thanks to the city's continued efforts through the 64th Battalion of the 10th Field Regiment Royal Canadian Artillery, soldiers still venture forth from Yorkton to serve Canada. Joining the 64th at the now historic Armory is the local branch of the Royal Canadian Army Cadets, which gives children a chance to honor their country and learn leadership and discipline skills. From just its third year of existence to the modern day, Yorkton stood for Canada and contributed a great deal to the national effort. While tragic sacrifices had to be made, Yorkton has grown to be one of the most honored contributors in Saskatchewan in terms of the military. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. See you next time, history buffs.